Good evening, everybody. We're all delighted to be here. When you think about the Intergenerational Forum, I think of them as change agents, solution seekers. But today, we kind of exist in this global cultural fog of threats, opportunities. So I hope that we can clarify some of this fog, get out of the fog a little bit, show a bit of a way forward, ranging from off-planet mining and colonies, robots, to your very personal responsibilities. And then to that end, our panelists include Mickeyla Clark, who's really passionate about robots. Love talking to her. Josh loves talking to her, because we're all passionate about the opportunities presented by robotics. And then Karla Stephan was recently at the UN climate. I just call her a change agent, and you'll tell us more about yourself later. And then after we're out in orbit, we're going to come back to Earth with Stacy, who's going to bring us right down to Earth as the realist, because she's the CEO of Climate Financial Advisors. So she's going to tell us how it really works. So Mickeyla, why don't you start off by telling us a little bit about what you've been up to and why you have this interest?
As of recently, I've been very invested in STEM, like programming, engineering, that kind of stuff. At my school, I am in our engineering program, but aside from that, I independently was recently doing this internship that was very heavily involved with being able to help a staff that works incredibly on like global projects helping children in third world countries. So that was something that inspired me to be more focused on how do I help the people in my community, how do I make the community around me better, and what can I use my skills for to make the world a better place.
And Karla Stephan has taken a whole different direction. So tell us a little bit about what you've been up to.
Yeah, so I've always been super passionate about activism and about social justice and fighting for civil rights, but I think I really started getting involved with the climate movement at the beginning of this year, which is when it started to take off, really. I was one of the 5 DC organizers for the March 15th climate strike, and from there I grew to become National Finance Director for US Youth Climate Strike, which is a youth org, a climate justice movement group that prioritizes inclusivity and diversity, which is really important and needs to be talked about more in the climate movement. But so I helped organize March 15th, and then September 20th was our last strike, which was super big all across the country. It was really cool to see. And then after September 20th, I was at the UN Youth Climate Summit. That's what I've been up to.
She's very busy, and she goes to school,
yeah.
Evidently. Josh Izenberg, would you tell us a little bit about Offworld and some of your initiatives on Earth and Offworld?
Sure. So just briefly, Offworld is an autonomous robotics company based in California, born out of friendships and ideas among a group of like-minded folks who are graduates of the International Space University. And just as an aside, when I was there in 1997, Arthur Clark was the chancellor, and my prized possession is my certificate from ISU signed by Arthur Clark. So I almost brought it tonight to show it, but I figured that was a little bit much. So Offworld is a group of true believers, really. We believe that humanity's future includes being off-planet. Partly because we're just old school kind of space folks who've been dreamers for a long time, but we also view it as the ultimate insurance policy for humanity. So our plan is to play whatever role we can in providing a robotic workforce for any kind of off-Earth industrial job that you can think of.
And then Stacy is the CEO and founding partner of Climate Financial Advisors. So this is a real critical position at this time when we're looking for investments for sustainable ventures. Mm-hmm. So tell us about what you do.
Sure. So my name is Stacy Swann. I'm CEO of Climate Finance Advisors. We're about 4 years old. And we like to say we work at the intersection, at the nexus of climate and finance. Yes, we talk to people who are interested in investing in things that are climate smart, and there's a growing number of those people out there, which is wonderful, because there's a lot of really innovative ideas out there that need to be funded, so all of that is very good. But we also spend a lot of our time these days doing what I like to say is really trying to educate and build capacity within the financial system for how to address climate change. And what do I mean by that? If you can infuse into the DNA of all of finance, so that every dollar that's invested, every $100, every $1 million, if you can do that, you can actually, if you can infuse into every dollar a notion of climate risk and sustainability and resilience, you actually have the ability to change the way money flows. And it no longer becomes an incremental issue of people who want to invest in good things. It becomes everything is invested towards things that are both resilient and climate smart. And frankly, we have to do that. We don't have that much time to change the way our economies work.
So as I was talking to each of these, Mickeyla and her love of robots, she started with the off-planet mining on the moon that Josh's vision has. And she said, well, so who owns the moon anyway, right? Mm-hmm. And then what other questions did you have for Josh and everybody for robotics and mining and moon and autonomy?
Well, going off of who owns the moon, the most important question is, what is the role of government in doing this? Because you have a lot of private companies trying to invest in mining off-world or just doing just about anything off-world, but who owns the moon? What role does the government play in getting the public opinion about mining or going off-world to be excited?
Yeah, I mean, so I was in, last week I was in Luxembourg for what they call Space Resources Week, which is a series of conferences put on by the Luxembourg Space Agency to talk about space resources, which is, you know, sort of a euphemism for asteroid mining. And this topic comes up a lot. You know, what role does the government have to play, the public sector have to play? And it's a tough one because, you know, there are a lot of folks who are of the opinion that the government needs to create the framework in order for these things to happen. But, you know, the Outer Space Treaty, which says that that no nation can express sovereignty over a celestial body, you know, and taken a step further by the Moon Agreement some years later, the agreement amongst countries started to break down over who could do what. So I think that public sector, I think that the government will have an important role to play. My instinct is that it may eventually become a bit of the Wild West where the private sector ultimately leads the charge. And like many things in the law, things sort of sort themselves out after the fact. That the law, you know, the policy is one thing, but that the law will eventually have to catch up to what the private sector is doing. That's my best guess.
Well, I'd like to throw it to Stacy for a second because you do travel all over the world with policy. So do you see governments making initiatives and policy in this direction?
Towards innovative financing around things like this? I wish they'd do more of it. It used to be that they saw it was in their own self-interest to invest in these things. And the R&D for certainly things like space travel and thinking about really breaking kind of open the imagination for things off planet, I think has diminished over the last couple of decades, and we need that kind of investment more than ever, right? And you know, certainly a number of governments around the world are starting to think about the climate issue. I won't talk about our government here. Because not much needs to be said about that, but it's really, in terms of thinking about hopeful messages around climate change and government activism and policy around it, there's a number of governments that are doing a lot on this issue and think about this in very deep and detailed ways because they recognize the economic imperative for their countries. So that's a positive thing. I would say if I were giving any constructive feedback to that crowd, it all needs to happen faster. It all needs to happen much faster than anybody is working on this. We can't take 5 years, we can't take 10 years. We can't just issue spot, we actually have to start doing things. And some of the things that we're gonna do and that we have to do might not work, but we have to try because we don't have that much time to limit the warming that could actually create catastrophic issues for us that we've never seen. I applaud the governments that are really taking this seriously and the policymakers. On the finance side, a number of them also see it in their self-interest from an economic stability perspective, and that's really interesting to see.
Well, I was going to ask Karla, because she's out there instigating the change agent. So you've seen the change of the numbers of people. Mm-hmm. Well, what is your sense of urgency about this, and how long do we have before we all croak?
I mean, that's a good way to put it. There's a huge sense of urgency. We have, they say that scientists say that we only have 10 years left, but it's actually less because we've already started to see the effects of the climate crisis, like the extreme weathers and the natural disasters that are happening at an insane rate and putting a lot of low-income communities at a disproportionate, a disadvantage. But it's super urgent. It's been urgent for a long time. I think that the climate activism has just started to call more attention to it, but it's always been urgent. And now we have more people involved in the movement, so it's starting to be visible more to politicians, but it's still as urgent as it's ever been, if not more urgent, because nothing is happening.
Well, some things are happening.
Some things are happening.
Josh over there is happening. When are we moving to the moon now, do you say, Josh?
Well, I would call Jeff Bezos and ask him that, because he probably knows best. Yeah.
It's a little expensive to go, though, right now, right?
It's incredibly expensive. And, I think that, like many things, there needs to be, the sort of standard thinking is that there needs to be a reason, there needs to be a market. There needs to be a reason for people to want to spend the money to do it. So we'll see how it develops.
Instigate the individuals, make the government, make the policy. We can make this happen, can't we, Mickeyla?
Yes, I think it's plausible, but one question I do have is that as we're moving things off planet, there are a lot of private industries that are focusing on the more commercial aspect, like novelty things, like spending time in a hotel on the moon, or being able to go into low orbit, like you said earlier in our independent conversation. But don't you think that this kind of advancement leaves people behind? Because there are communities that are incredibly impacted by the change of the climate. We have indigenous people who are trying to live their natural way of life, but because of the impact that we as individuals, as cities, as governments have had on the nation, these people are struggling to live their natural lives, and they have no idea what's happening. But they can't afford this option of going off to the moon. This is super expensive. Why is it that this cost is going to be non-accessible?
So, this is why these kinds of conversations are essential, right? Because we need everyone's perspective on these issues, and frankly, we need the younger generation's enthusiasm to help drive us to good solutions. I think that there are opportunities, big picture, long-term opportunities for off-Earth activities that can benefit everyone. So, at Offworld, we are, like I said, we are really, we're zealots, we're true believers in all of this. And what we, one of the endpoints that, we would love to see, hopefully before we're all gone, is, space solar power as a solution for the entire Earth. Solar power is sort of the ultimate renewable energy source, and in particular, solar power collected outside of the Earth's atmosphere, even better. And there has to be a solution where private enterprise and the public sector come together to figure out a way to incentivize the development of, say, a space solar power network that can provide really limitless energy for the entire planet without regard to where you live, who you are, what your income is. So, I'd like to see us, and it's optimistic maybe, but I'd like to see us, figuring out a way to drive towards that kind of solution, and that's again part of what we believe in.
Dennis Hope has been out there selling 611 million acres of the moon at $36.50. It's probably not too late to get your acre. He's also sold to Presidents H.W. Bush, Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan, And if you really want to go all out, why don't you just go buy Pluto? You can have the whole thing for $250,000. Deal. So that's real investing in future real estate. But coming back, to Earth, we were talking today, even at lunch, about in Beijing, where the airplanes can't land. You were talking about Arizona. I'm particularly interested in clean air because it's very personal. I'm a World Trade Center survivor of 9/11. Wow. So I really like clean air, clean water. Yeah. So what do you think? What are you going to do for me? Yeah. How are you going to get all these people to make my air clean?
I mean, I think it needs to happen on an individual level. You need to have the will to fight for it, because there's people that can actually make a change. Those are the voters. So everyone over 18, I'm guessing most of you, not to be rude, like I'm under 18, so like I can't vote. But I'm saying, sorry, I didn't mean that to be rude or anything. But I mean, with voting, you have that special power that a lot of people don't have, and the people that are super passionate about it don't have, and that's that you can choose the right candidate that has the right climate policy. So I think the real way that we would get clean air and clean water is by having effective policies passed, and we can only do that through politicians that will pass that.
But what about us as individuals? What can we really do you think?
Okay.
On a personal, like when I go to the store or whatever.
Yeah. So first you can do is make smart consumer choices. So there's like that comes with like not buying from fast fashion places or making green choices about your food. But on a bigger level, and I think a more important level, not supporting corporations that promote the fossil fuel industry, and that's a big thing. Actually, 100 companies make up 71% of the emissions in the earth, because like fossil fuel industries actually have such a negative effect and have such a big carbon footprint on the globe. And so I think researching companies and corporations and making educated decisions about where you're buying things from, and also like educating yourself on the climate crisis and educating others, because a lot of people don't know the facts and the science behind it. That's another important thing that you can do, is mobilizing people, because there's power in numbers, so mobilizing people to join the fight. And another thing that adults can do is standing behind the youth in this, but also trying to uplift our voices towards the politicians so that these policies can be passed, because it's what the people want.
Excellent, really well stated. And Stacy, using data and analytics, how can you support sustainability and climate change initiatives?
Sure. So, and you know, the topic of climate change can seem pretty daunting, right? And particularly if you hear things, you know, the IPCC report last year, the special report about this time last year said 10 to 12 years. 10 to 12 years to prevent kind of locked-in warming that would be of a different kind of magnitude than we're prepared to deal with, right? But we've already locked in enough warming to have effects on the climate system, and we're already seeing those effects, right? I've been working on this topic for about 20 years, give or take, and up until about 5 years ago, you talked to someone about climate change, and it was all about solar power, wind farms, renewable energy, maybe energy efficiency, maybe green buildings. But in the last 2 to 3 years, there's been a slow awakening. It certainly hasn't happened fast enough, and it's not broad enough or mainstream enough. But you know, we're seeing 1 in 500 year rain events in the city of Houston in a period of 3 to 4 years. If you think of what a 1 in 500 year event means, it means it's supposed to happen 1 in every 500 years. From a statistics perspective, that happening 4 times in such a short period of time is not a 1 in 500 year risk. This is happening now, and our risk is much higher than we appreciate, right? Our time horizons are also kind of a little out of whack. Everybody has their own vision of when this is going to happen, but a lot of people still think it's happening kind of way down the road. I'm going to get to your question about data analytics because it's important. The reason why this awareness has been interesting to watch is because we also have the ability to take weather and climate data out of the cloud, which is available, up there in the cloud. And there's some really, really interesting and innovative companies that are taking that data and translating it into value at risk. Why is that important? Because investors, banks, hopefully consumers soon, when you buy your next house, to get a flood score for your house. Figure out kind of what the climate-related hazards are for that investment over the period of time that you're going to live there will be, and make a different decision. Your mortgage bank is going to start doing that, and they're going to start pricing that into your mortgage spread pretty soon. But the data and analytics part that's pretty fascinating is we've got companies that are out there using AI and machine learning, taking that weather and climate data and translating it into things that can be usable for investors. That's how you start to get money moving in the right direction. The shame is that, the science wasn't enough. Now we have to start seeing the physical impacts impairing value and returns. But, I'll take it because we've got to move fast. So on the data and analytics side, there's lots of really interesting applications of how you can use weather and climate data that are happening. In my little world of what I do, I think it's fascinating to see how the investors are starting to use this. Some of it's being driven by policymakers, but not really. They're slow to wake up to this, particularly here. But, this is going to happen. And it's going to happen fast, I think, because from the policy side, the public also has a balance sheet, and the balance sheet isn't infinite. And when you think about what happens in Houston, the public policymakers in Houston are now staring at infrastructure costs that are double, triple, quadruple what they thought just 4 years ago, because they've had these intense rain events that aren't going to stop. So it's a big deal. People are starting to put the dots together, and the public balance sheet is also at risk.
And I just want to throw out one of my favorite little towns called Greenburgh, Kansas, if you're familiar with it. On May 4th, 2007, an EF5 with 1.7 miles wide wiped out their 1.48 size town. It leveled 95% of the town, killed 11. Their population is reduced from 1,574 to about 800 today. But here's what they did. They turned their whole city into the first LEED city in the nation. With wind turbines, they provide all their own power. They've created a tourist attraction out of this tiny little town in Kansas. And it doesn't hurt that they have this 1887 largest man-dug well. And also a 1,000-pound paleolite meteorite. Go for it, Josh. It's time to mine that meteorite, see what you can find in there. But as we turn to the back to your question about income equality and the disparate side, it looks like we're going to need 70% more food in just like 30 years or something like that. And yet we have artificial intelligence, GPS, drones, satellites, robots, hydroponics. There's a wonderful warehouse in Newark that's 5-story hydroponics, might be more than that. It's pretty impressive. And so there's opportunities there. So what do you think is our next biggest opportunity for
technologically
changing?
or
anything you want?
Well, I think it doesn't have to be that technology advances in order to benefit the people who built it. I think that over time, that technology needs to start facing towards architecture. How do we combat, like Stacy said, all these differences in the climate? Like, people are really starting to feel the effects of climate change, and if you don't get on board now, you're going to be left behind, because technology is essential and key to how we move for the next few years. Like, we need to move fast. But as Josh said earlier, there's always going to be that difference in public versus private sector. And I believe that, as we've seen with the ISS, that the public sector can really do a lot with individual countries can do a lot. And then you have NASA moving to incorporate commercial aircraft. The public and private sector can work together in order to benefit all of humanity, off-world or on-world.
That's excellent. And do you agree with that?
Yeah, I agree.
Absolutely. And what else do you have to add?
I think that, wait, what was the question again?
What do you have to add to that in terms of the solutions coming out, do you think?
Yeah.
I mean, how long are you going to have to fight? Do you think you'll succeed in your activists in 5 years so that we'll still be saved in 10 years? Do you think?
I mean, I hope I don't have to do this for much longer because, like, we need policies now, but I think adding on to that, switching from fossil fuel energy to, like, renewable resources and stuff is going to be a big thing. And, like, regarding jobs and things like that, we can switch those jobs as well to renewable jobs. So, like, I think that everything that is the way that things are going now can have a green alternative. And yeah, we just need, like, things to happen because we need policy for these things to happen, for technology to advance and be actually enacted. We need the policy to be passed.
I love your impatience. Would you run for president, please?
I'm not old enough.
I know, but you can think about it. And what do you think, Stacy? Listen to all this.
Yeah, I think it takes all of us, actually. The policymakers, live in their own kind of complicated world, and it's not to kind of give them any excuses at all, but, I couldn't imagine doing a job that I had to kind of reapply for every 2 years and then try and think about good public policy that was going to serve a community that's pretty broad. That's really not an excuse, but it is just to say that, we all live in our constrained kind of environments. I think on the policy side, I think what hasn't happened is the recognition that it's in their interest as well from a long-term planning perspective. They are just as short-term thinkers as the investors or bankers or, finance folks kind of out there, which is a shame because they're public servants and they're meant to be protecting all of us for the long run. But they're starting to wake up to the finance side, and you see this in microcosms like Houston, but also in Europe. And certainly, I do a lot of work in the emerging markets, and a lot of places around the world really aren't prepared for what's about to happen in the next decade or two when it comes to climate change. The risks that they face are not just a function of the hazards, whether it's warming temperatures or droughts or sea level rise, but it's the vulnerability and exposure combined. That is kind of taken together, the risk that they're facing. And if you're already highly vulnerable and highly exposed, your ability to address this is really difficult, which means the public balance sheet, one way or the other, is going to pay for it. On the positive side, though, we really there's so much innovation out there. I mean, not just the data and analytics stuff, which kind of makes me excited because it helps me tell a story to people who are only moved by certain types of information. But, in agriculture, there's a company out there that's putting something on the stacks of fossil burning energy plants to take that waste and turn it into cement. I don't like fossil burning power plants, but what a great innovation, because cement is pretty dirty as an industry and very expensive, and this stuff is recycling the pollution before it gets in the air. That's kind of cool. So there's a lot of that's happening, and frankly, we need to put a lot of money and a lot of resources into accelerating and helping those companies make those moonshots, because we're not going to win if we don't have some of those moonshots get made. That's an exciting thing, and that's something to focus on. But I think it's all of us. And the activists, we need far more of them. Everybody needs to be an activist. This isn't just for the youth. This isn't just for kind of certain parts of the political spectrum. This is going to affect everybody, no matter what income class you come from or where you live. This has to kind of be something that we're all fighting for.
Mickeyla?
Well, I wanted to say that intergenerational, cooperation is very, very important because the youth are running things, basically, but you don't want to be left behind just because you're older and you don't understand. Because you guys are the ones responsible for voting. And I think an important part of that is holding people accountable. Our politicians are our public servants. They are there to serve us. Make sure you're asking them, what are you doing for my community? How am I going to be benefited from this? And hold them accountable for what they're not. And not even just who's running for president, but the public servants in your community, in your state. in your towns. Like, it's very important that we make sure that we pay attention to who's funding these people, the corporations that are feeding money to these politicians to make them say one thing, even though to us they'll say another. There's a lot of policy pushing when it comes to like funding a politician. Like, if a larger corporation gives a politician money, they'll push their agenda rather than the agenda that is most beneficial for the public. We have to take the control out of corporations' hands and put it back in ours, because this is a democracy and we need to fight for our rights.
That's great. Josh?
What she said, yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, truly what you said, I couldn't have said it better. But back to something that Stacy said, you know, it takes all of us. I think it takes all kinds of ideas. It takes all kinds of voices. It takes very enthusiastic voices, truly. Mostly takes the enthusiastic voices. You know, I think that it takes a focus on what we can do on Earth, and, you know, maybe selfishly a little bit, I think it takes some ideas about what we might be able to do and what we might have to do beyond the Earth eventually, and that's my point about, you know, an insurance policy, because we don't know what's going to happen. There are threats we're aware of on Earth. Climate change is one of them. There are existential threats that, you know, we don't know. You know, the dinosaurs were wiped out by an asteroid. Just who knows? So and maybe I'd be accused of being the, you know, thinking too much outward. But you know, I think that we all need to have ideas. We all need to have solutions. But I do think that as we move forward, that we need to do it in a thoughtful, meaningful way, so that we don't have a repeat of Apollo, right? That when we go again, and we go permanently. But we do it in a practical and thoughtful way, where it's not just crazy moonshot solutions, right? Where we're talking about mining water on the moon to build propellant depots in orbit. It's, okay, so these are the things that we want to do off Earth. What can we do on Earth that are reflective of those ideas, right? That can show the value that they can deliver, like reducing energy costs, like taking people out of harm's way on Earth, because those are the things that we're going to have to do off Earth one day. So I think to me, it's the companies that are, the businesses, the thinkers that are being thoughtful in that respect, that are going to help contribute to the solutions that I'm focused on, which is outward facing, while the more enthusiastic folks are focused on the solutions inward facing.
Fair enough. So what I hear everyone saying is we need some real global initiatives, some urgency for sure. We need agreements, policies, government. We need to stop plundering our Earth. Fair, right? And start paying attention to what we as individuals, our own responsibility is, and care also for the rest of the world. So I would like to close with a statement no one will like, and it's from a British rock band from almost 50 years ago. It was called 10 Years After. Does anybody remember? No, they weren't even born yet. The quote was, "I'd love to change the world, but I don't know what to do, so I'll leave it up to you. You, all of you, okay?" Fair enough. So thank you very much.